Hello, this is Angela with Parkos Permaculture. I am down in the back of our permaculture garden here in Portland, Oregon in Zone 8B. We are all the way in the back of the property and the chicken coop is behind me. We've deconstructed our area that we have the chickens in to protect them from bird flu. We are fingers crossed dealing with the end of bird flu season, and our poultry are now free ranging down in the backyard. As I mentioned in a recent video about integrating our new poultry with our existing flock, we have a 3-paddock rotational system. When I rotate the poultry into an area that has been fallow and let them forage in there, you can hear ducks happily doing that in the background, it means that I am beginning to close off an area that has been heavily foraged. Now, we've had an unusually rainy, muddy, cool spring, and that has kind of wreaked havoc on the area that my adult poultry were in for a number of months. Because this is the back of our sloped backyard, the water tends to pool down here and it is muddier than the rest of my yard, and I don't yet have a great drainage solution. I have put in a series of swales uphill to catch and store water uphill to slow it so that it will sink into the ground in my annual veggie beds and it will never get down here into the back of my garden. So that has reduced the muddiness back here a lot, but it's not perfect. It's still downhill. And so because it's been so wet and rainy, this area had been thoroughly worked over by my ducks and chickens, and it was just mud. It didn't matter how much wood chips I put down here. I found even though I mulch heavily with wood chips, if my ducks and chickens are in that area for a very long period of time, they very efficiently turn those wood chips into soil, much quicker than if I had just let them slowly break down as mulch. The chickens really stir it up and really mechanically break down those wood chips into smaller and smaller pieces, and they decompose very, very quickly. So I had an area that was pretty much just mud. And by mud, I mean rich in organic matter, but also just no mulch and really saturated.
Anyone who has chickens know they will quickly denude an area of vegetation, but Chop and Drop also works really well for a path that has been worn down by heavy foot or wheelbarrow traffic.
So what I'm doing now, as the birds here, you can see them. Hello, turkeys. You can see I'm letting them in here while I do Chop and Drop, but then I'm going to lock this area of the run so that it can just rest. So I'm going through and I'm pruning and putting down lots of leaves and branches and woody material. That's what Chop and Drop is. You literally walk through with your pruners or your machete or something and you chop and drop biomass onto the floor of your food forest. Chop and Drop is a way to mulch using existing resources, existing plants, and prune at the same time. So I keep all of my prunings on site unless I have something that is heavily diseased and I don't want to set up a cycle of disease and I need to remove it. But for the most part, I just go by with my pruners, I chop off chunks and I throw them down on the ground. And that provides that nice sheltering mulch layer to protect my soil, increase my soil fertility, reduce mud, and also prune my plants at the same time. Now let me show you really quickly. Pan past everybody here. This plant behind me is a silverberry in the genus Elaeagnus. It is a nitrogen fixing shrub and it produces an edible berry. It's okay. The seeds from that berry are also edible. But what I love about the Elaeagnus genus is they are nitrogen fixers. So when you prune your Elaeagnus, what you get is these pieces that you prune off. I'll show you a piece here. So when you prune off this material, you throw it down on the ground, and as it decomposes, it releases nitrogen. But what really is the benefit to your system is when you prune back heavily the foliage above ground, you get root dieback underground. And that root dieback will release nitrogen into the soil itself underground. And so for me, I really love growing those nitrogen fixing shrubs and using them as Chop and Drop as much as I can, because I'm getting a lot of not only the addition of the biomass, the shading and sheltering the soil, I'm getting a release of nitrogen into my orchard, into the soil around things like my mulberries here.
A quick aside here, a lot of my plants have been struggling because of the late snow and weird cool weather, but my mulberries have set a record crop.
So I am getting a nice addition of nitrogen to my system. I am getting a good pruning for my plant, and I am getting that additional mulch on the ground. So chop and drop, I love it. It's easy. You go through and you just snip, chop, things are laying in the path, in my way, I cut them, throw them on the ground. If things are overhanging where I don't want, I cut them, I throw them on the ground. If things are too big for an area, I cut them, I throw them on the ground. Chop and drop is really no-brainer, really easy to do. I do it several times a year. I think it's really fun and fulfilling. And at the end, I have an area that the ground had maybe been pretty beat up by my poultry, and I have covered it with biomass, and I can let that area now rest, and I can let it regenerate. I can let the seeds dormant in the soil spring forth. I can seed it with cover crops if I want, but generally I tend to throw down like maybe expired seeds that I have in my stash, and then just let whatever is there kind of naturally germinate as this area rests. And once it is coming back into production again, I put my poultry back in it. That way, I have free forage for them. I can have a lot more of their food that is produced with basically no effort on my part, just letting an area rest and recover. I'm able to grow more food for my poultry and source more of my food on site. And chop and drop is part of that system for me. It's part of an important function that I as the gardener serve in all parts of my garden. For me, chop and drop is a way that I can mimic the natural behavior of browsers and grazers. I can come through and mimic disturbances in the system that would normally break off limbs in my garden. I can fulfill those roles that maybe need to be artificially enhanced or need to be taken up by the gardener because I don't have large browsers in my garden.
So here you can clearly see the benefits of chop and drop. I have covered the wet, muddy soil with a protective layer of mulch, while at the same time pruning back the foliage that was hanging in the path and taking back some of my shrubs and fruit trees which had grown too large. Chop and drop allows me as the gardener to help accelerate the progression of my food forest as I give it a hand in building that lovely, lush forest floor litter layer. Part of my June chop and drop is reducing the extra vegetation on my fruit trees. I do a summer prune on my fruit trees, but I am careful to make sure I don't damage the young, immature fruit.
So as I'm going through here and I am pruning back my silverberry, you can see all of the chop and drop there. Not pruning any of the mulberry right now because it's laden with immature fruit, but as I pan along here, I have this Cox's orange pippin here, which can do with a summer prune. So I do summer prune carefully. I come in and I pinch off the water sprouts, and this makes great chop and drop. I do a little bit of heading back and a little bit of water sprout removal, and all of that becomes chop and drop.
Yes, it's not as tidy as a bag of bark chips, but it is sustainable, free, and producing fertility in my permaculture food forest.
I hope this video was helpful. I hope you will consider the very easy and successful method of chop and drop in your permaculture garden, in your food forest, in your understory, in your annual garden. There are no parts of your garden where if you need to prune that you can't see a benefit from chop and drop. It's that stacking functions. There's so many layers of added benefit, especially if you are including nitrogen fixing shrubs like the Elaeagnus genus. So I'll be back with more on sustainable permaculture design, effective permaculture design, growing your own food in the city. Check out my Patreon down below in the interim.